Okay, so hello friends, welcome to yet another episode with Can the Elucidator. Uh, Today we are looking at chromatography in analytical chemistry. Uh, I'm sure we are done with electrophoresis. We looked at the basic concepts and we looked at a bit on the types of electrophoresis. What's left to do is for you, friends, to just go through practice and things will be fine. You'll be able to answer conceptual questions based on electrophoresis if you practice. Remember, failing to practice is practicing to fail. So practice is the key, even though the elucidator is there to just give highlights on these basic concepts. So if you're new to this channel, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so that you get first-hand information or notifications whenever I post something or I elucidate a bit on anything. So if you have questions, you have requests, you can leave a comment or you can contact me directly on my contact number or even WhatsApp or even Facebook. The contact details are in the description box below. So you can check for them, then you can talk to me. I usually respond, even though I'm a bit busy sometimes, but I mostly respond. So I'm sure I'll see your request and I'll respond to your request. So let's get down into chromatography now. So chromatography is simply a technique which is used to separate, identify, or determine certain chemical components in a complex mixture. So, when we talk of chromatography, we talk of separation of mixtures, separation of chemical components from the mixture, identification, and determination. But mostly, it is separation, which is mostly used. So, for even before looking at types of chromatography and everything, one thing we should know is that in any chromatographic setup, there are two things involved. There is the stationary phase and the mobile phase. And the stationary phase is just a fixed phase in the setup in which the mobile phase carrying the chemical components we want to analyze or separate washes through. So it's always fixed to either a column or any chromatographic setup. While the mobile phase is the moving phase, it is the one that washes through the stationary phase, carrying the analytes with it, and it is also the one which is called the eluent. The eluent. Yes, it is also sometimes called the eluent. So the mobile phase and the stationary phase is a very key figure in here. Why do I say so? It is because separations in chromatography are based on the interactions between the mobile phase and the stationary. Sorry, but interactions of the mixture with the mobile phase and the stationary phase. So the mixture interacts with either the stationary phase or the mobile phase, and this is what determines the separation of different types of molecules. And I'll be able to elucidate as we are going, so please make sure that you follow this. Don't just end here on the basic principles because you'll miss out a lot. So I'm sure you already know this, but the mobile phase or the stationary phase are made in such a way that when the mobile phase is, let's say, the mobile phase is polar, then the stationary phase will be non-polar. And we know what polarity is. It is just the ability of something having a certain charge. Regardless of positivity or negative charge, just bearing charge, being charged, property of being charged is called polarity. So the two phases are made in such a way that when the mobile phase is polar, then the stationary phase will be non-polar. If the mobile phase is non-polar, then the stationary phase will be polar. Why? Is because these are different components in the mixture. You will find that certain components will be polar and certain components will be non-polar. So what will happen is that there will be an interaction with either the stationary phase or the mobile phase. So basic concepts show that polar molecules interact with other polar molecules, and non-polar molecules interact with non-polar molecules. So let's just say, for instance, we're looking at we have a mixture in which we have polar molecules, and the mobile phase is polar. So what will happen is that when migration starts, what will happen is that the polar molecules will be interacting with the mobile phase, since polar interacts with polar, ferropolar, polar with polar. So which means the mobile phase will interact with the polar molecules, and so the separation will be in such a way that those polar molecules will migrate faster because they are interacting with the mobile phase and they are moving together with it. While the non-polar molecules will not interact with the mobile phase, but will interact with the non-polar stationary phase, and hence they will tend to migrate at a very slow rate. If it's vice versa, then everything, just know that polar interacts with polar and non-polar interacts with non-polar. Polarity differs a lot from charge. So do not mistake polarity to ion exchange or charge. So there are types of chromatography like ion exchange, which depends on ions, how an ionic or cationic a molecule is. So charge depends on positivity or negativity. But the polarity just depends on, if they are charged, they interact with each other. If they are not, they do not interact. So that's the basic concept here. So let us look at the types of chromatography now. So there are only two basic types of chromatography, namely liquid chromatography and gas chromatography. Only two basic types. And this is based on the types of molecules to be separated. So the name comes from the types of chemical components you are separating. If you are separating liquids, then most likely you will use liquid chromatography. If you are separating gas molecules, the name will be a gas chromatography. But this gas and liquid chromatography, or just the liquid chromatography, can also be separated into two. They can be separated into liquid solids chromatography and liquid chromatography. What does this mean? This means that depending on the stationary phase being used, we can have either liquid solids or liquid. And since it's liquid, which means the molecules to be analyzed are liquid, and the molecules to be analyzed should correspond to the mobile phase. So which means if it's liquid chromatography, most likely it should have a mobile phase which is liquid. So a mobile phase is liquid, then the stationary phase is solid, and hence it is called liquid solid. Liquid for the mobile phase, solid stationary phase. And liquid has both mobile phase and stationary phase solid. And just based on these two types, again, we can talk of something else. When the stationary phase is solid, in a type of chromatography, we call that type of chromatography adsorption chromatography. And when the stationary phase is liquids, we call this type of chromatography partition chromatography. Partition chromatography. Then we come to gas chromatography. Gas chromatography can also be separated into two, namely gas solid and gas liquid. There is no solid chromatography. No, there is no solid chromatography because it is utterly impossible to separate chemical components which are in solidified form. So depending on the types of molecules we are separating, that's where the name comes from. So it is liquids or gas. So we have gas solids and gas liquid. And this shows that gas is the mobile phase, solid is the stationary phase, and in gas liquid, gas is the mobile phase carrying the analyte, and liquid is the mobile phase. So those are the types of chromatography, and we have now different types. We have HPLC, TLC, we also have this other type, paper chromatography. We have gas chromatography. We have capillary chromatography, and many other types of chromatography. So they just depend on the types of molecules we are separating. That's the basic type. Then the basic principles now of chromatography is that chromatography separations are based on one, polarity, and I've explained what polarity is already. So polarity, affinity, that's 2. 3, charge. Then we can talk of 4, we can talk of solubility, and 5, volatility. This fifth one, volatility, mostly applies to gas chromatography, but these other types, these other 4 types, can apply to any type of chromatography. And as we go on, we'll be able to elucidate on these types of chromatography. But those are the main basic types of chromatography, and I've already elucidated a bit on polarity. But on affinity, which is the second one, we have the stationary phase, and mobile phase. So the separation in based on affinity will be that. So get this from me. The separation based on affinity will be that when a mixture is applied in a chromatographic setup, and depending on any type of movement you're talking about, either capillary action or anything, what will happen will be that as the mixtures start moving, there will be interactions of the mixture with either the stationary phase or the mobile phase. And what will happen will be that if the mixture will, or certain components of the mixture start interacting with the stationary phase, we'll say that they have higher affinity to the stationary phase. And if they have higher affinity to the stationary phase, then they will start migrating at a slower pace, because the ones which are interacting with the mobile phase, which is the moving phase, will just move with the mobile phase and they will be separated first. But the ones interacting with the stationary phase will tend to move at a slower rate. So what will happen is they will migrate last, they'll be eluted last. In short, so to say, to be specific, they'll be eluted last. That's affinity, and we'll say they have higher affinity to the stationary phase. The ones which will move with the mobile phase, will say they have higher affinity to the mobile phase. Then solubility is simply the ability of a certain molecule to dissolve. So in terms of solubility, we say the higher the solubility, the faster the separation. Molecules that will dissolve fast, usually in a liquid setup or in gaseous setup, they will dissolve fast and they'll be taken up with the mobile phase faster. But the ones which will dissolve late, they will tend to get stuck at a stationary phase, stationary station, which is the station, stationary phase, and they'll get stuck there until they dissolve, whilst the ones that are dissolved first, they'll be eluted first. That's solubility there. Then charge, I said it is something very different from polarity. Why? Because in this type of chromatographic separation, now we look at how an ionic or cationic a certain protein or any other molecule or any other chemical is. So if the molecules, depending on what the stationary phase is made up of, sometimes stationary phase will be made up of maybe positively charged molecules attached to it. So what will happen is that it will attract the negative charges, and hence the positively charged ions will migrate faster, while the negative charges will start interacting with the stationary phase. That's charge, but I'll elucidate a bit when we look at ion exchange, because it is part of that. Then volatility is simply the ability of a substance to turn into gas. So the higher the volatility, the faster something moves, because it gets to turn into gas fast and gets taken up together with the mobile phase, and that's that. So that's volatility. I think I've explained the basic concepts of everything. If there is anything that I've left, I'm sure you as researchers will be able to get the concepts on your own, research more on what elution is. Maybe I can talk about elution. Elution is simply the process in which the solutes are washed through the stationary phase. And we said something about the eluent. I said the eluent is mostly the mobile phase, because eluent is defined as the solvent used to carry components of the mixture through a stationary phase, and mostly the solute that is used, or the solvent that is used, is the mobile phase, is what we call the mobile phase. So basically that's the introduction on chromatography, and next time we interact, I'm sure in under 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I can explain all the types of chromatography you've covered so far, and I'm sure we can be done with chromatography in just one video tutorial, after understanding the basic concepts, the movements, and everything. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, so that when I record the next video explaining the different types of chromatography, you're able to get the notification earlier than anyone who hasn't subscribed. It has been a pleasure to elucidate basic concepts to you, friends, and I wish to interact with you anytime soon. It has been the elucidator here, and thank you very much. I'm out.